Now I've seen a lot of things in my time: cattle rustlers who'd sell their own mothers for a silver dollar, gunfighters who could split a playing card at 50 paces, and gamblers who'd bet the sunrise against the moon. But nothing prepared me for what I witnessed on that dusty Thursday morning in Copper Ridge, when dignity itself went up on the auction block. You see, there are some stories that stick to a man's ribs like hardtack and beans, stories that won't let you sleep easy until you've passed them on. This here's one of those tales, a story about what happens when a woman's got nothing left to lose and a man's got everything to give. So settle in, friend, pour yourself something strong, and let me tell you about the day Hope wore work boots and carried a crumpled piece of paper that would change 2 lives forever. The autumn wind carried more than just the scent of dying leaves through Copper Ridge that morning. It carried shame, and Martha Whitmore could taste it bitter on her tongue as she stood on the courthouse steps, her worn shawl pulled tight around shoulders that had borne too much weight for too long. Martha wasn't much past 30, but grief had a way of aging a woman faster than prairie sun. Her husband Thomas had been gone near on 2 years now, claimed by consumption that winter when the snow piled higher than the windowsills and the medicine never came. Left behind were debts that grew like tumbleweeds, rolling bigger with each passing month, until they threatened to bury what little remained of the life she'd tried to build. The bank had already taken the house. The general store had seized what furniture could cover her tab, and now Sheriff Coleman stood beside her with papers that made her stomach turn to lead. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice rough as boot leather. "It's the law. When a widow can't settle her debts," he trailed off, unable to finish what they both knew. Marriage auction, like she was a prize heifer at the county fair. Down in the town square, a small crowd had already gathered. Some faces showed genuine pity, women who'd brought their mending to watch and whisper prayers. Others wore the cruel curiosity of folks who'd never known real hardship, treating her misfortune like Saturday entertainment. 3 men stepped forward as potential bidders. Each one made Martha's skin crawl. First was Silas Crenshaw, whose ranch hands never stayed more than a season. Word was his last 2 wives had died under mysterious circumstances, and his laugh sounded like rusty gate hinges. He wore a gold watch chain that caught the morning light like a snake's belly. Next came Ezra Polk, the town's self-appointed moral authority, who spoke of Christian duty while his eyes held all the warmth of February creek water. He'd made his fortune selling watered-down whiskey to desperate men and calling it temperance. The third was Tobias Marsh, barely 25, but already owning half the valley through his daddy's railroad money. He collected beautiful things, the way other men collected coins, to possess them, to break them, to throw them away when the novelty wore thin. Martha closed her eyes and felt the weight of Thomas's wedding ring, still warm against her finger. "Forgive me," she whispered to his memory. Standing at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed as a fence post, was a man named Jacob Stone. Wasn't much to look at. Average height, sun-weathered face beneath a battered hat that had seen better decades. He worked odd jobs around the valley, mending fences, breaking horses, doing the kind of hard labor that kept a man's hands calloused and his back bent. Most folks barely knew his name. But Jacob's eyes never left Martha's face, and in those eyes burned something that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with recognition. He knew what it meant to stand alone against the world's indifference. Auctioneer Pete Morrison cleared his throat and raised his gavel. The sound echoed off the courthouse walls like a judge's sentence. "Now then," Morrison called out, his voice carrying the practiced rhythm of a man who'd sold everything from livestock to family heirlooms. "We're here for the marriage auction of Mrs. Martha Whitmore, as ordered by territorial law to settle outstanding debts totaling $437. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was more money than most men saw in 2 years. "Bidding starts at $50, Morrison announced. Silas Crenshaw stepped forward first, his boots clicking against the wooden steps like a clock, counting down to doomsday. $50, he called out, tipping his hat to Martha with a smile that never touched his eyes. Martha felt bile rise in her throat. $50, the same price as a decent milk cow. 60 came Ezra Polk's voice, thin and sharp as a Sunday sermon about hellfire. Tobias Marsh laughed, a sound like breaking glass. $100, he said, loud enough for the whole square to hear, and I'll throw in a new dress, something appropriate. The crowd stirred. $100 was serious money. Martha watched as several women in the crowd looked away, unable to meet her eyes. She understood. Tomorrow it could be any of them standing here, if their luck ran dry and their men didn't come home. 100 going once, Morrison called. Martha's knees nearly buckled. She thought of Thomas, of the way he'd hold her when the nightmares came, whispering promises that everything would work out fine. She thought of the little graves behind the church, the babies who'd never drawn breath, and how she'd have no one to tend those small stones once Marsh owned her. 100 going twice. That's when Jacob Stone stepped out of the crowd's shadow. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the morning air like an axe through kindling. I got a different kind of bid. Morrison paused, his gavel halfway raised. What's that, son? Jacob reached into his worn coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellow with age and handling. His hands shook slightly as he held it up. This here's a deed, he said, louder now so everyone could hear. Free and clear title to 160 acres of prime grazing land up in Miller's Valley, water rights included, worth near on $800, maybe more. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the wind whistling through the courthouse eaves. Tobias Marsh's face went red as a turkey's wattle. Silas Crenshaw's jaw worked like he was chewing bitter cud. That's impossible, Polk sputtered. You're just a common laborer. How could you possibly? Jacob's smile was thin as winter ice. My daddy homesteaded that land 30 years back. Died when I was 12. Been working other folks' ranches ever since, keeping the taxes paid on ground I never had use for. He looked directly at Martha then, and his voice gentled, until now. Morrison examined the deed with shaking hands. His eyes went wide. Well, this is legitimate, filed proper with the territorial office and everything. He looked up at the crowd, then at Martha. Ma'am, this bid exceeds your debts by more than half. But Jacob wasn't done. He stepped closer to Martha, close enough that only she could hear his next words. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I ain't bidding to own you. I'm bidding to free you. You take that deed, you walk away right now, and you never see me again if that's your choosing. That land's yours, free and clear, no strings, no obligations, just... Martha stared at him. This stranger who wore kindness like other men wore their Sunday best. Why? She whispered back. Jacob's weathered face softened. Because I buried my own wife 5 years back. Know what it's like to have folks look at you like you're already dead. Figure maybe, he stopped, swallowed hard. Figure maybe we both deserve better than what the world's been handing us. The gavel came down with finality. Sold to Jacob Stone for 160 acres of deeded land. But as the crowd began to disperse, muttering and shaking their heads at this unexpected turn, Jacob Stone did something that would be talked about in Copper Ridge for generations to come. He handed Martha the deed, not as a husband claiming his property, but as a man offering freedom to someone who'd forgotten what it looked like. The cabin's small but sound, he said, still speaking in that quiet voice that somehow carried more weight than all of Marsh's bluster. Creek runs year-round, soil's good for a kitchen garden, and there's enough timber to last through any winter. Martha's fingers trembled as she took the paper. Real ownership, real security, real choice, for the first time in longer than she could remember. What about you? She asked. Jacob shifted his weight, suddenly looking younger, despite the lines around his eyes. Well, I was hoping, that is, if you wouldn't mind. He cleared his throat. There's enough land for 2 cabins, or one bigger one if that's what you decided you wanted, someday, when you're ready. The morning sun broke through the clouds just then, warming Martha's face in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. She looked at this man, this stranger who'd given up everything he owned to save someone he barely knew, and saw something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. "Mr. Stone," she said, her voice steady for the first time in months, "I think I'd like to see this land of ours." They walked out of Copper Ridge together that day, 2 broken people who'd found something whole in each other's company. By Christmas, there were 2 cabins on Miller's Valley land. By the following spring, there was 1. And if you were to visit that valley today, you'd find a small cemetery where 2 headstones sit side by side, worn smooth by prairie wind and time. The names have faded some, but you can still make out Jacob and Martha Stone carved deep in the granite, along with the words they chose for their marker. Some debts are paid with money, others are paid with love. Now, I've told you this story, not because it's the strangest thing I ever saw, though it surely was, but because it reminds us that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be measured in dollars and cents. Sometimes a man's true worth isn't in his bank account or the size of his ranch, but in his willingness to give everything he has for someone else's freedom. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you're standing on what feels like the end of the world, hope comes walking out of the crowd wearing work boots and carrying exactly what you need to start over. The desert's full of stories, friend. But this one's worth remembering when your own back's against the wall and you're wondering if there's still good left in this hard world. Trust me on that.